I'm not gonna lie, I really like writing. It's probably why I've been able to create all these videos that require a lot of research and scripting after almost 5 years. Now as for you, anonymous video watcher, you may be a little less inclined to just pick up a pencil or pen and start scribbling away. In fact, the whole concept of writing may give you some traumatic flashbacks to high school English, where it felt like all they wanted you to do was write and explain your thoughts and write persuasive essays on things you didn't care about. Well, like it or not, writing may just be the most important invention humans have ever created. Without it, we wouldn't have history at all, where we can get accounts of the past from people who were really there. But how did we as a species come up with carving into rocks or inscribing in clay? And who was the first to do it? That's what we're going to find out on this episode of Stuff You've Probably Wondered. It turns out, actually, that 3 separate civilizations created writing independently. And when I say writing here, I mean going from things you say with your mouth to communicate specific things, to using a series of symbols that represent language. That sounds like a mess of terms, but there were plenty of places in prehistory where a thing called ProtoWriting developed, in which people wrote things, but it wasn't really an entire language, just some symbols. The oldest semblance of writing ever found was discovered in 2003 in northern China at a dig site called Jiahu. There were no towns or settlements here, but there were these tortoise shells that had very simple symbols on them, and they kind of looked like what modern-day Chinese and its ancestors would come to look like, all the way back around 8000 BC, way before civilization was even a thing. And no real writing system would show up again in this part of the world until much later. Another form of proto-writing was found around modern-day Romania, called the Terturia tablets. These were thought to have been made around 5500 BC and are small, 6 cm long circular and rectangular tablets. They have a lot of symbols on them, broken up into 4 sections, though again, they don't form any sort of system, especially since there's nothing like it to compare it to. This is why a lot of skeptics believe they were forged, not really made at the apparent time. Also, no other evidence of writing would be found for several thousand more years in that area. The final form of proto-writing was a lot simpler and definitely existed. One of the earliest civilizations of all time, the Indus Valley, had this really awesome series of clay seals that denoted certain people and families. These seals could have tons of different things on them, and the crazier they were, the more powerful the person on the seals was supposed to be. Like this one, where a man with 3 faces and 2 horns sits between a tiger and some sort of cow rhinoceros creature. Not sure what that's supposed to mean, but he was probably a lesser god. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there were 3 different civilizations that can all be credited with the invention of writing. They were the Olmecs of Mesoamerica, the Chinese of the Shang dynasty, and the Sumerians and Akkadians from Mesopotamia. While the first 2 came along in 900 BC and 1500 BC respectively, Mesopotamian script came along way earlier, between 3500 and 3100 BC. And while we're going to look at all 3, we're going to focus on Mesopotamia's because it's the oldest and because it's the most well documented. In other words, we can see exactly how it changed over time. So why did writing become a thing in Mesopotamia? Mostly because the gods of this area were particularly angry pretty much all the time and needed constant attention. But the more likely reason was to keep track of what types of goods were traded where. That's right, writing as a whole invention probably came into being because of accounting and bookkeeping. Now at this stage it wasn't writing but clay tokens, another form of proto-writing, that could have been used as early as 8000 BC, and as far as we can tell, oval-shaped stones represented oil and cone-shaped stones represented grain. Accompanying these were larger stones that served as ledgers showing how many total goods were traded. Eventually, as civilization expanded, universal symbols were developed as a quicker way of getting the accounting point across. This is the stage of writing evolution where we see a transition from 3D to 2D in the form of pictographs. These were not quite writing either because they were images of things, and there was no structure of grammar or abstract things yet, just a limited vocabulary of important things, oil and grain. Written language really began in Mesopotamia with a phenomenon that truly shows language going from simple to complex, the transition from pictographs to logograms. Logograms are symbols as well, but if you just looked at one, you wouldn't be able to tell what it's meant to mean. This is what's called oral language, because the symbols only mean what they mean, based on what's been previously agreed upon. The language is solely abstract, not concrete. This is basically where it ends for Sumerian and Akkadian cuneiform script. There is a 4th stage for writing systems where a syllabic or alphabet script is developed, but Mesopotamian writing doesn't have this. Actually, the concept of an alphabet, a system where one symbol equals one sound, was developed only once, and every other alphabet is a descendant. In modern-day Lebanon was a script called Proto-Canaanite, or sometimes called Proto-Sinaitic. In this script, each letter was a logogram, but the thing in question really had nothing to do with the letter. For example, the letter Alp was an ox head, and the letter Bet was a house. From this one language came Phoenician, the most popular and widespread ancient alphabet, Linear A and B of Crete, Greek, Arabic, Cyrillic, and of course the Latin alphabet used in English-speaking countries today. So that wraps up the oldest of scripts, but let's briefly go back to those other two scripts I mentioned earlier, since ignoring them would be just as good as ignoring those equally important parts of the world. Starting off in the east with China, the earliest Chinese script came during the Shang dynasty between 1500 and 1000 BC. It went through many changes over time like the cuneiform, but the first one was called Jiagu Wen, or the Oracle Bone script. Interestingly, this script was also written on bones and tortoise shells, like the Jiahu from 5,000 years earlier, but this one was used specifically as a way to predict the future. Symbols would be carved on the bones, they'd be heated up, and the cracks that would form would predict anything the user wanted to know. Our last stop on this rather lengthy episode is the Olmec script, which was the first to emerge in North and South America. The oldest of all was the Cascajal block found in the village of Lomas de Tacamichapan in Veracruz by road workers. This stone contains 62 distinct symbols of varying sizes and shapes. It was thought to be from 900 BC, though of course some skeptics think that it's not that old, or even Olmec at all, since it doesn't look like the scripts developed later. Regardless, Olmec still holds the belt for the oldest script in the New World. Thanks for watching, and as always, if you have any questions you want me to answer, or have an original song you'd like me to put in the background of a future video, leave it in the comments or email me at stuffyou'vebrobablywondered@gmail.com. Also in the comments, share your thoughts on these old writing systems. Do you think the super old stuff counts as writing? What are some other reasons civilizations might have to create writing? Either way, I'll see you next time on Stuff You've Probably Wondered.